Why did the forest feel like it was watching her that morning? Rachel Morgan had walked these trails for years, same boots, same path, same quiet rhythm. But today something in the air shifted. The fog wasn't just fog, it was heavy, clinging, almost deliberate. It pressed against her skin like memory. The Blue Ridge Mountains were supposed to be her escape, from the noise, from the questions, from the uniform she'd folded and hidden in the bottom of an old cedar chest. But sometimes peace hides what refuses to die. She took another sip of coffee, black and bitter, her only addiction left. On the porch, the boards creaked the same way they always did. Milo, her gray Labrador, sat by her feet, his head tilted toward the tree line. The birds weren't singing. The forest wasn't whispering. Everything just stopped. Rachel frowned. "What is it, boy?" Milo didn't bark, he just stared. That was enough. Rachel set down her mug, reached for her old canvas backpack and slung it over her shoulder. Inside were the same things she carried every time she wandered out: a knife, a compass, a battered map with her own notes scribbled in the corners. But she didn't know why she grabbed her sidearm this time. Habit, maybe, or instinct. Some things never really leave you, even when you think you've buried them under years of silence. The trail started gentle, winding down through oak and pine, the air damp and cool. But as she descended deeper, the world grew quieter, the way it does before a storm. Rachel breathed in the scent of wet earth and moss. Every step reminded her how far she'd come from who she used to be: Staff Sergeant Morgan, U.S. Air Force mechanic, 2nd Aviation Regiment. The woman who once repaired roaring Apache engines under desert heat and rotor wash. The one who'd been part of a machine too large, too loud, and too cruel to question. That life felt 1,000 miles away now, or at least it had. She stopped when Milo did, suddenly mid-trail. His ears shot up, body tense, a low growl rising from his chest. Rachel crouched beside him. "Easy," she whispered. But her own pulse was hammering. The air was colder here, unnaturally so. Then she saw it. Through the mist and vines, something metal glinted faintly, a reflection of light that shouldn't exist this deep in the woods. She stepped closer, pushing through the undergrowth until the shape began to take form. Curved metal, a rotor blade, a half-buried fuselage cloaked in moss. Rachel's breath caught. It was a helicopter. Not just any helicopter. An AH-64 Apache. The same kind she had lived and breathed for years, every bolt, every system, every sound. But this one wasn't supposed to be here. She stepped closer, her boots sinking into soft earth. The paint was faded to ghost gray, the tail snapped, the canopy shattered. No rescue markings, no recovery tape, no evidence of a crash report ever filed, just silence and the forest swallowing it whole. Rachel's throat tightened. She ran a gloved hand across the hull, brushing away moss until the serial numbers appeared. Her eyes narrowed. That code, she'd seen it before, long ago. Milo pawed at the dirt near the cockpit. She knelt beside him, whispering, "What is it, boy?" Then she saw it, the faint outline of something hidden beneath the floor panel. Years of rust had sealed it shut, but Rachel's hands worked on instinct, like she was back in uniform again. She found a loose hinge, pried it open, and froze. Inside the compartment was a small, sealed metal case, military issue. She pulled it out, heart hammering, brushed off the grime, and saw the faded imprint of a unit insignia she hadn't seen since Afghanistan. Her stomach turned cold. She flipped open the latch. Inside, a single hard drive sat wrapped in plastic, still perfectly sealed. Rachel just stared at it. It shouldn't be here. Not like this. Not buried in a forgotten helicopter with a pilot's skeletal remains still strapped to the seat. She swallowed hard, whispering a quiet prayer for whoever he was. The dog pressed against her side, sensing her unease. This was wrong, every part of it. She could have walked away, left it there, reported it to local authorities, pretended she never saw it. But she knew better. She'd seen how the military buried its secrets, how missions went unrecorded, names erased, evidence rewritten. And something about this screamed cover-up. Rachel took a shaky breath and stood. She slid the drive into her pack, zipped it tight, and whispered to herself, "All right, let's see what you are." As she walked back through the forest, the world felt different, heavier, quieter, as if the trees were holding their breath. She didn't realize it yet, but the moment she touched that hard drive, her life and her past began to rewrite itself. Back at the cabin, dusk had settled. The fog thickened again, curling like smoke around her windows. Rachel placed the drive on her kitchen table beside her old laptop, a relic from her service days, still functional, still encrypted with her Air Force credentials. She hadn't powered it on in years. When the screen flickered to life, the sound of the fan brought back memories she'd buried deep, late nights in dusty hangars, hands stained with oil, laughter echoing through the noise of spinning rotors. But those memories darkened fast. The missions, the lies, the faces she never saw again. She shook her head and focused, plugged the drive in. Rows of encrypted files filled the screen, classified, locked behind firewalls and military-grade encryption. She couldn't open anything, but she didn't need to. The markings, the file structures, they were unmistakable. These weren't standard flight logs. These were black site operations. Rachel leaned back in her chair, exhaling slowly. "What were you hiding out there?" she whispered. Milo whimpered softly, his head resting on her boot. The sound grounded her. She reached down, stroking his fur. "We'll figure it out, promise." Outside, thunder rumbled far off across the valley. The storm was rolling in. Hours passed as she tried every access method she remembered, using old codes and patches, but nothing cracked the encryption. Frustrated, she closed the lid, rubbed her temples, and whispered, "Maybe I shouldn't have touched it." But before she could stand, Milo lifted his head, growling. Rachel froze. The sound came first, a faint buzz, like a mosquito in the night, growing louder. She walked to the window and pulled the blinds open just enough to see through. And there it was. A small light gliding silently through the fog. Not a star, not a plane. A drone. And not the kind you buy in stores. Military grade. Rachel's stomach dropped. She stepped back slowly. Her pulse raced. She hadn't told anyone, she hadn't reported anything. No one should know. Unless someone was already watching. She moved fast, military fast. Grabbed the hard drive, her sidearm, her pack. She slipped her knife into the strap and whistled for Milo. The dog came instantly. "Go," she whispered. But she didn't make it 2 steps before the window shattered. Gunfire ripped through the cabin. Splinters exploded off the walls, glass raining like ice. Rachel hit the ground hard, rolling behind the couch as rounds tore through her kitchen. Milo barked once, sharp, warning. Rachel's training took over. She stayed low, ears ringing, mind running tactical calculations she thought she'd forgotten. They were here, whoever they were. Her cabin, her peace, was gone in seconds. She reached under the rug, pulled open a hidden trapdoor she'd built years ago, an old bootleg tunnel that led out toward the ridge. She'd never thought she'd need it again. Milo down. The dog obeyed instantly, slipping into the dark tunnel. Rachel followed, closing the hatch behind her just as the front door above burst open. Boots, voices, commands. She crawled fast through dirt and roots, lungs burning. Bullets echoed faintly overhead. Her world was collapsing in sound and smoke. She gritted her teeth, whispering under her breath, "You picked the wrong mechanic." The tunnel stretched longer than she remembered. Her knees scraped rock, her back hit roots, but she kept going. Finally, a pale light appeared ahead, the forest beyond. She pushed through the final barrier of vines and rolled into the cold night air. Milo emerged beside her, panting, eyes wide. Behind them, smoke curled from her cabin. Rachel didn't look back long. She couldn't. Because the moment she did, she'd stop, and stopping meant dying. She and Milo ran deeper into the woods, guided only by moonlight and instinct. Her lungs ached, her hands trembled, but her mind was clear now. The drive in her pack felt like a heartbeat against her spine, a silent reminder of what had begun. When they finally stopped at a ridge, dawn was just starting to rise. Rachel collapsed behind a fallen tree, chest heaving, sweat cold on her skin. Milo pressed against her leg, still alert, still guarding. Her cabin was gone. Everything she'd built to forget her past was ash. But what scared her wasn't the attack. It was what it meant. Someone didn't just want the drive. Someone wanted her gone. Rachel clenched her fists. She buried her uniform years ago, but tonight the war had found her again. And she wasn't running anymore. How do you start running from ghosts that already know where you're going? Rachel didn't sleep that night. She couldn't. The cold mountain wind burned her lungs, but she didn't feel it anymore. Her hands were numb, her thoughts sharper than they'd been in years. Every sound, every crack of a branch, every distant hum made her turn. The forest wasn't just alive, it was watching. She crouched beside Milo under the thick roots of an old oak, her flashlight turned off, her eyes adjusted to the faint blue of the moon. Somewhere down the slope, two men's voices echoed faintly, clipped, professional. Not soldiers, contractors. She knew the type, the kind who didn't wear flags, only money. Milo growled low. Rachel placed a steady hand on his neck, whispering, "Not yet, they'll move on." The voices faded after a while, swallowed by the woods. Rachel finally exhaled, her breath trembling in the night air. The drive was still safe in her pack, the only thing that mattered now. Her home, her past, her peace all gone. But she couldn't think about that, not yet. She pulled the map from her bag, the one she'd marked with emergency routes years ago. Her fingers traced the faded paper until they stopped at a note scribbled in old, familiar handwriting. Widow's M, backup stash. W. Her chest tightened. W as in Captain Thomas Weber. A name she hadn't said out loud in years. She remembered his laugh, the way he teased her about overtuning the Apache, how he said one day she'd build something that would outfly them all. Then one mission, he never came back. No report, no ceremony, just vanished. And now this crash, this drive, this clue. Could it be him? She didn't want to believe it, but part of her already knew. She folded the map, packed it tight, and whispered, "Come on, Milo. We've got miles to go." The two of them moved quietly through the forest, stepping over fallen branches, avoiding open paths. The moonlight filtered through the canopy, silver and sharp. Rachel's body ached, but she pushed on. She marched across worse terrain under fire before. This time, though, there was no unit, no radio, no backup, just her. And that felt familiar, too. Hours passed. The mist thickened until the world turned to shadows. Her boots squelched in the wet earth, her breath visible in the cold. Somewhere behind her, a faint mechanical buzz echoed the same drone sound from before. She froze, pulling Milo close. It was sweeping low, searching. She slipped into a ravine and covered them both with a thermal blanket from her pack. It wasn't perfect, but it would confuse the sensors long enough. Milo pressed against her chest, trembling slightly, and for a moment she wasn't a soldier, just a woman holding on to the last living thing that trusted her. "Easy," she whispered. "We've got this." The drone passed overhead, its red light cutting through the fog. Then it moved on. Rachel waited, 1 minute, 2, 5. Only when the forest returned to silence did she breathe again. She pushed herself up slowly, her knees stiff, her resolve harder. She looked north, where the ridge rose toward Widow's Mine, 20 miles through hostile ground. "Let's move." By dawn, her clothes were soaked from mist and sweat. The cold bit through every layer. They stopped once by a creek so Milo could drink. Rachel crouched beside him, splashing water on her face. The reflection staring back at her didn't look like the woman who'd chosen to disappear from the world. It looked like the one who used to fight in it. Her jaw was set, her eyes tired but unbroken. The drive sat beside her, sealed tight in its case. She stared at it, whispering, "You better be worth this." A gust of wind rustled the trees. She packed up fast, scanning the ridge line. That's when she saw them. Two dark figures moving in formation about 300 yards uphill. Tactical gear, suppressed rifles, night vision rigs. She recognized the silhouette instantly. Contractor sweep teams. Not search and rescue. Cleanup. They were tracking her. Rachel's pulse kicked into combat rhythm. She slung her pack, grabbed Milo's collar, and moved low through the brush. Every step mattered. She couldn't outrun them, she had to outthink them. The terrain sloped down toward a narrow stream cutting through rocks. She followed it, moving against the current, using the water to cover her trail. Milo followed quietly, sensing her urgency. Behind her, the faint click of boots on stone echoed. They were closer. Rachel crouched behind a fallen log, checked her weapon. Only 2 magazines. Not enough. This wasn't going to be about firepower, it was going to be about wits. She unhooked a flare and a small mirror from her pack, thinking fast. The memory hit her, Weber's voice in the hangar years ago. When you're outnumbered, Morgan, misdirection saves lives. Not bravery. Bravery gets you killed. She exhaled sharply. Let's test that theory. She planted the flare near the creek bend, angled the mirror toward it, and moved fast through the trees in the opposite direction. When the flare ignited, the mirror reflected light across the slope, like movement. Within seconds, gunfire cracked through the forest. They took the bait. Rachel ran, heart pounding, lungs burning. Branches whipped her arms as she climbed the ridge. She didn't stop until the gunfire faded behind her. Only then did she fall to her knees, gasping. Milo nudged her arm, whining softly. She smiled weakly, brushing his fur. Still got it, huh? But exhaustion was setting in. The adrenaline was running thin. Every muscle screamed for rest. She looked at the sky, dawn light creeping over the ridges, painting everything in pale gold. They'd been moving all night. She needed shelter, even for a few hours. Rachel found a hollow between 2 boulders, just wide enough to crawl into. She set a small thermal tarp over the entrance and wrapped herself and Milo together inside. It wasn't much, but it was hidden. As her body started to give in to fatigue, her mind kept replaying the same images: the wreck, the pilot's bones, the drive, Weber's name on the map. She wanted to believe it was coincidence, but deep down she knew better. They'd flown missions together once, missions that didn't exist on paper, ones they were told never happened. Weber was a good pilot, but he asked questions about missing cargo, unusual flight plans, unmarked crates, the kind of questions command didn't like. And then he vanished. Rachel had never stopped wondering. Now, after all these years, it was like his ghost had reached out through that wreckage. Sleep came slowly, uneasy. Her dreams were fragments: desert skis, rotor blades spinning, Weber's voice over comms, laughter turning to static. Then fire, always fire. When she woke, the sun was already high and the world was too quiet again. Milo was alert, staring toward the west. Rachel sat up, blinking through fatigue. Smoke, thin and gray, curling into the sky from somewhere behind the next ridge. She cursed softly. They were burning the forest, flushing her out. She packed up fast. There was no time. They'd close the distance by nightfall. Widow's mine wasn't far now, maybe 3 hours if she moved fast. She jogged through the brush, staying low, avoiding the open trails. The air grew colder as she climbed. Her boots slid on loose rock, but she didn't slow down. The sun dipped behind the peaks, shadows stretching long and sharp. Finally, just as the light began to fade, she saw it. A jagged opening in the rock face, half collapsed, overgrown with vines, Widow's mine. The air that flowed from within was colder than the night itself. Rachel knelt beside Milo, whispering, "This is it. Whatever's left of Weber, it's in there." Milo wagged his tail once, loyal as ever. She pulled out her flashlight and stepped inside. The beam cut through the darkness, revealing rusted carts, rotted beams, and puddles of black water. The deeper she went, the stronger the smell of earth and oil became, and something else. Something faintly metallic, like gun grease. Her boots echoed softly on the stone. Every creak of timber sounded like a whisper. Steady, she told herself. Then in the corner of the tunnel she saw it, half buried under old mining tools, covered in dust. A black military-grade case. Her pulse jumped. She knelt, brushed it clean, and opened it slowly. Inside were sealed documents, an SD card labeled video evidence, and a satellite phone wrapped in foil. Her breath hitched. Weber had left it here. Her hands trembled as she slid the card into the phone and powered it on. The screen flickered, then a video opened automatically. A woman appeared, sharp suit, calm eyes, an office behind her. Her nameplate read, Isabella Reed, CEO, Aegis Tactical Solutions. Rachel's eyes widened. Aegis, the private military giant. The woman on screen was arranging an illegal arms deal with a foreign buyer, American weapons sold to groups they were supposed to be fighting. The footage was crystal clear, the date recent. Rachel felt sick. This was what Weber had died for. She gripped the phone, whispering, "You were right, Tom. You were right all along." The echo of her own voice lingered in the cave, swallowed by silence. She turned the phone over in her hands, thinking. There was only one person she could trust now, Ben Carter, an investigative journalist Weber had once mentioned, the kind who'd exposed government scandals before disappearing underground himself. Rachel typed his number from Weber's old notes and hit call. 2 rings. Carter. Her voice shook. "My name's Rachel Morgan. I found something Weber died for. They're coming for me." Silence. Then his calm voice, "Where are you?" She hesitated. "Widow's mine, but I won't be here long." She ended the call before he could reply, because she knew the signal would be traced. She packed everything, the drive, the documents, the SD card. But as she turned toward the exit, a sound echoed behind her. Footsteps. Heavy boots close. Her heart stopped. They'd found her. What do you do when every step you take echoes like a warning? Rachel froze. The mine tunnel stretched out before her, dark, narrow, lined with rotted wood beams that groaned like they remembered pain. The flashlight in her hand flickered once, throwing her shadow long against the rock wall. Milo stood at her side, muscles tight, hackles raised. The air had changed, heavier now. She could hear them. Boots on stone, slow, deliberate, close. Rachel slipped the flashlight off, plunging the tunnel into darkness. Her breathing slowed. She could feel her own pulse in her throat. Every survival instinct she'd ever learned screamed the same thing: don't move. She waited. A single beam of light cut through the black, someone else's flashlight. It swayed, catching flecks of dust, cutting through the silence. 2 voices murmured, low, calm, methodical. "Signal came from here," one said. "The phone's still warm, she's close." Rachel clenched her jaw. She knew that voice. She couldn't place it yet, but it was familiar, that crisp, cold tone she'd heard 100 times during briefings years ago. Contractors. Aegis, most likely. Reed's men. Her mind raced. The tunnel curved, left a few yards ahead, splitting into 2 paths. One led deeper, the other to a collapsed shaft she'd noticed earlier. Now it was her only choice. She pressed a hand to Milo's chest, whispering, "Quiet." He didn't move, not even a breath. Rachel eased backward, boots soundless on dirt. She felt along the wall until her fingers brushed the edge of the side tunnel. It was barely wide enough for her to slip through. The rocks scraped her shoulders as she pressed in, crouching low, the air stale with dust. The footsteps grew louder. Flashlight beams swept past. Then stopped. "She's here," one voice said. Rachel's heart hammered. She reached into her pack, fingers closing around cold metal, her last frag grenade. A relic she'd kept since her service days, almost superstitious. She'd hoped never to use it. She pulled the pin silently. Waited. The boots came closer. Now. Rachel tossed the grenade down the tunnel and turned away, shielding Milo. The explosion tore through the mine, a deafening roar that shook the walls and filled the air with fire and dirt. The tunnel collapsed in seconds, a thunderous chain reaction echoing through the mountain. Rachel coughed, lungs burning. Go, she gasped, pulling Milo forward through the dust and smoke. They stumbled down the narrow shaft, rocks crashing behind them. Every second felt like borrowed time. Somewhere behind her, a voice screamed, then silence. The cave groaned. The ground trembled under her boots. She could barely see through the haze. The flashlight flickered back on, illuminating cracks racing along the ceiling. Move, 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 she shouted more to herself than Milo. They ran through the twisting tunnel, her breath coming in sharp bursts, the roar of collapsing stone chasing them. The walls closed in. Ahead, a faint glow, moonlight bleeding through rusted metal. A ladder. Rachel grabbed the first rung, pain shooting through her shoulder as she climbed. The hatch above wouldn't budge. She pushed harder, screaming through clenched teeth. Then, with a metallic groan, it gave. She shoved it open, pulling herself up into the cold night air. Milo leapt out behind her. The mine behind them roared one last time, collapsing inward in a spray of rock and flame. Rachel rolled onto her back, gasping, watching as smoke poured from the hole. Her chest ached, her arms trembled. But she was alive, somehow still alive. Milo pressed his nose against her cheek, whining softly. She laughed weakly, voice hoarse. You okay, boy? He barked once, tired but defiant. Rachel sat up slowly. The night sky stretched endless above them, the stars cold and sharp. She could see the valley below, the forest glowing faintly from the fires her pursuers had set. They sealed themselves in their own trap. She looked at the phone in her hand. The screen was cracked, but the data card was intact. That meant one thing: she still had what they were willing to kill for. She had proof. Rachel leaned against a boulder, exhaustion washing over her. Every muscle screamed for rest, but her mind wouldn't stop. She replayed the video again. Isabella Reed's calm voice, the signatures, the coordinates. Weapons deals, false flags, deaths written off as training accidents. And Weber, he tried to expose it. He died for this. She closed her eyes, whispering into the wind, "You didn't die for nothing, Tom." The words came out like a vow. But even vows felt fragile out here. Rachel pulled out her small field transmitter, one of the few pieces of tech she'd managed to keep hidden over the years. She hooked the drive into it, initializing a data burst. The files began transmitting in encrypted packets. It would take hours, maybe longer, to reach Carter. She wrapped it in foil, buried it under a rock outcrop, and marked the spot on her map. Then finally, she allowed herself to stop. The adrenaline drained, replaced by pain sharp and spreading. Her hands were cut, her knees raw, her ribs bruised. The cold gnawed at her bones. She leaned back against the rock, breathing slow. The forest was quiet again, but this time the silence didn't feel hostile. It felt earned. She looked at Milo, who had curled beside her, eyes half closed. "We did it," she whispered. "We're still here." The words barely left her lips before she heard it, faint static from the phone. She frowned, lifting it closer. A voice broke through the crackle. "Rachel, are you there?" Her heart jumped. "Ben." "Yes, I got your transmission. Jesus, Morgan, you're lucky you called when you did. That video, it's everything." Rachel looked down at the phone, her hands shaking. "They'll kill anyone who sees it. You have to go public now. Tonight." "I will," he said. "But listen to me. They're not done. Reed's people have government contracts, defense, intelligence, the whole chain. If she falls, others fall with her. They won't let that happen quietly. I don't care, Rachel said, her voice low. They started this. Ben hesitated. Rachel, I've been doing this a long time. There's something you should know. Weber didn't die alone. His co-pilot survived briefly. Said your name before he went under, said, she deserves to know. The words hit her like a blow. She swallowed hard. He said that. Yeah, you were on their list too. You and Weber both. Whatever you two found years ago, they thought it died with him. Rachel stared at the dark horizon, the mountains stretching like shadows beneath the stars. Not anymore. Where are you now? Doesn't matter, get that story out, I'll handle the rest. She ended the call before he could answer. There was no safety anymore, only purpose. She sat in silence for a while, watching the first faint glow of dawn. The wind carried the scent of smoke and pine. Somewhere far below, a distant rumble of engines echoed through the valley. They were still searching. Rachel tightened the straps on her pack. No more running. She needed to disappear long enough for Carter to publish the truth. Then, maybe, she could breathe again. The next 2 days blurred together. Rachel and Milo moved through the high ridges, living off ration bars and creek water. She avoided every trail, every open area. Once, she spotted a chopper sweeping low over the valley, unmarked, black. Aegis was tightening the noose. But she was used to that feeling, being hunted, being underestimated. Every night, she made small fires that burned no brighter than a candle. Every morning, she buried the ashes and kept walking. Then one evening, she stumbled upon a sight that stopped her cold. Her old service insignia painted faintly on a rusted metal crate, half buried by moss. It was the same unit Weber had flown for. She approached slowly, brushing the dirt away. Inside were remnants, empty ammo boxes, ration tins, and a weathered notebook sealed in plastic. Rachel opened it carefully. Inside were Weber's notes, dated detailed, his handwriting. They're using private routes through Afghanistan. Weapons meant for allies are being redirected. Contracts falsified. Reed's name appears twice. She turned the page. If anything happens to me, Rachel will know where to look. Widow's mine is the key. Her throat tightened. He'd written it for her. Milo whimpered softly, resting his head on her knee. Rachel smiled weakly through tears. You always knew I'd find it, didn't you? She whispered. The wind rustled through the trees, carrying a sound almost like laughter or maybe memory. She looked back at the valley, where smoke still lingered faintly from the fire she'd escaped. Somewhere out there, people were dying to bury the truth she carried. But Weber had believed she could finish what he started. And she would. Rachel closed the notebook, slipped it into her pack beside the drive, and stood. The sun was setting again, red and gold spilling across the horizon. Milo barked once, sharp and eager. Rachel smiled faintly. Yeah, boy, let's go home. She didn't mean the cabin. Home wasn't a place anymore. It was a purpose, something bigger than survival, stronger than fear. As the night fell around them, Rachel walked into the darkness, not away from the fight but straight through it. The truth had found its voice again. And it sounded a lot like hers. How do you live knowing the truth you carry could set the world on fire? Rachel didn't remember the last time she'd slept a full night. The days had blended gray dawns and colder nights, her body running on fragments of energy and instinct. Each sunrise brought a strange feeling, not relief, not victory, but the slow weight of what she'd done. Somewhere out there, Ben Carter now held the files. Somewhere, servers hummed as truth crawled its way into the open, unstoppable once released. And yet the forest around her was still, too still. Rachel crouched behind a ridge overlooking the valley. Smoke from the fires had thinned, leaving behind black scars where trees once stood. She scanned the distance through a pair of cracked binoculars. Down in the clearing, 2 armored vehicles sat idle, black, unmarked, men in tactical gear packing the perimeter. They hadn't left. They were waiting. Milo's ears twitched, his body tense beside her. She lowered the binoculars, whispering, "I see them too. They're patient." Her voice was low, rasped from days of cold air and silence. The dog looked up at her, those gray eyes reflecting everything she didn't say. She smiled faintly. "I know we're not done yet." It had been 2 days since the transmission. 2 days since she'd buried the drive, since the mine collapsed and sealed what remained of Weber's proof. She hadn't heard from Carter since. No confirmation. No news. Nothing. But that didn't mean nothing was happening. She'd seen enough to know that when truth moves, it moves quietly at first, like roots spreading underground before the storm hits. Still, the waiting was its own kind of war. Rachel leaned back against the rock, pulling her jacket tighter. The night air bit through the fabric. Her body was bruised and worn, her left shoulder still sore from the hatch escape. Every breath hurt a little, but pain had a rhythm familiar, grounding. She had survived worse. Her mind drifted, uninvited, to old memories. The smell of jet fuel, the sound of laughter echoing through hangars, Weber tossing her a wrench with that grin of his. "You treat machines like they've got souls, Morgan. Maybe that's why they never fail you." She smiled despite herself. "You'd hate what I've done with your mind, Tom." Milo nudged her hand. She scratched behind his ear, grateful for the silent company. There was something about that dog, steady, watchful, like he understood more than she could explain. The wind shifted. Down in the valley, one of the contractors lifted a radio to his ear. Moments later, the engines on both vehicles roared to life. Headlights flared against the fog, sweeping across the tree line. Rachel's stomach tightened. They weren't leaving. They were repositioning. She stuffed the binoculars into her pack, grabbed Milo's collar, and began moving uphill. If they had drones in the air, and she knew they did, the vehicles below were just bait. The real eyes were above her now, invisible, circling like hawks. The climb was steep. Rocks shifted beneath her boots, every muscle burned. The mountain air grew thinner, sharper, but she didn't stop. Not yet. She reached a narrow ledge near the ridge crest and crouched low. From here, she could see the entire valley, a dark sea of treetops swaying under moonlight. And in the distance, faint lights blinked civilization. Rachel's heart clenched. She hadn't seen a town in weeks. But going down there meant exposure. Cameras, databases, eyewitnesses. They'd find her in minutes. Still, she couldn't hide forever. She reached into her pocket, pulling out the last scrap of Weber's notebook she'd torn off, a single line scrawled in his handwriting. "If you reach them, tell the truth. Don't let them bury us twice." She folded it slowly, tucking it back into her jacket. "I won't," she whispered. The next morning came with frost. Rachel woke shivering, the world bathed in pale silver light. Milo licked her hand, urging her up. She rubbed her eyes, wincing as her body protested movement. Time to move. The valley below looked different in daylight, calm, deceptively so. The vehicles were gone, leaving only faint tire tracks in the mud. That should have eased her nerves, but it didn't. It meant they were repositioning for something bigger. Rachel started down the slope, careful to stay beneath the tree canopy. Her goal was simple: reach town, find a signal, confirm Carter was alive and that the truth had reached the surface. But as she approached the lower trails, she felt it, the hum. That same low, mechanical vibration she'd heard before. Milo barked once. Rachel's eyes shot up. A drone, sleek, black Predator class, sweeping low across the ridge. "Run!" she shouted, breaking into a sprint. Milo bolted beside her. The drone's spotlight burst to life, cutting through the trees. Bullets tore into the dirt, splintering bark. She zigzagged, diving behind a fallen trunk. The noise was deafening. Then suddenly the gunfire stopped. The drone hovered, scanning. Rachel reached into her pack, grabbing the EMP flare she'd salvaged from the mine. Only one chance. She waited until the drone banked low, then twisted the cap and hurled it into the open. A pulse of blue light exploded outward. The drone stuttered midair, lights flickering, then spiraled down in a hiss of smoke and metal, crashing into the valley floor below. Rachel crouched there for a moment, chest heaving, heart pounding so hard she could hear it. Her hands shook from adrenaline. She looked at Milo, who was panting, ears pinned back. "That's one less eye in the sky," she muttered, half smiling. But she knew it wouldn't buy much time. They'd know where the drone went down. They always knew. By dusk, she reached the edge of a small mountain town, population maybe 200, the kind of place that didn't make maps. Wooden storefronts, one diner, a general store, a faded flag waving weakly in the cold breeze. Rachel stood at the tree line, hood up, scanning. No patrols, no military presence. Yet. She exhaled slowly. All right, quick in, quick out. She hid Milo behind an old shed with food and whispered, "Stay quiet." He whined softly but obeyed. Rachel walked into town like a ghost. The streets were nearly empty. An old man was sweeping in front of the diner. A woman carrying groceries glanced her way but said nothing. She kept her head down, blending into the rhythm of small-town indifference. Inside the diner, the smell of coffee and grease hit her like a memory she didn't want. She slid into a booth near the back, choosing a seat that faced both exits. A waitress, maybe 20, tired eyes approached with a notepad. "Coffee." Rachel nodded, black. The girl poured and left without question. Rachel wrapped her hands around the warm mug, letting the heat seep into her fingers. It was the first real coffee she'd had since the cabin burned. For a moment, she closed her eyes. The simplest comfort felt like luxury now. Then she heard it. The television above the counter, an old flat screen with static lines flickering at the edges, switched channels automatically. The waitress frowned, tapping the remote. Rachel looked up and froze. The headline, running across the bottom of the screen, read, "Private Military CEO Isabella Reed, arrested for treason and arms trafficking." The footage showed federal agents escorting Reed out of a glass skyscraper in handcuffs, flashbulbs exploding around her. Reporters shouted questions, but Reed's face stayed calm, too calm. Rachel's throat went dry. It had worked. Carter had done it. The truth was out. The waitress sighed, shaking her head. "World's gone crazy, huh? One of the richest people in the country selling guns to enemies. Can you believe that?" Rachel forced a faint smile. "Yeah, I can." She paid in cash and walked out before the waitress could say another word. Outside, the air felt different, lighter somehow. For the first time in weeks, Rachel didn't feel like she was running towards something, or away. She was simply standing still, and the world was moving for her. When she reached the shed, Milo bounded out, tail wagging. She knelt, hugging him tight, whispering, "We did it, it's over." But deep down she knew it was. Not really. The story would ripple. Reed might fall, but others wouldn't. There would be damage control, investigations, denials. Some truths spark revolutions, others just fade beneath headlines. But at least now, Weber's name could rest. That night, Rachel found a small motel at the edge of town, cash only, no ID required. The room smelled of dust and old carpet, but it had 4 walls and a bed. She showered, washed the blood from her hands, and stared at herself in the mirror. For the first time in a long time, she didn't see a mechanic or a soldier or a fugitive. She saw someone alive. When she stepped out, Milo was curled on the rug. She smiled softly, whispering, "We're going home tomorrow." But when she turned off the light and lay down, sleep didn't come easy. The silence was too heavy again. And just before dawn, she woke to a sound that made her blood run cold, the low hum of an engine outside. She slipped out of bed, crouched by the window, and pulled the curtain aside. A black SUV sat parked across the road, engine idling, no plates. The door opened. A figure stepped out, tailored coat, precise movements. Even in the dark, Rachel recognized the face. Isabella Reed. Not in handcuffs this time. And she was looking straight at the window where Rachel hid. What do you do when the monster you exposed shows up at your door, unshackled, smiling? Rachel's pulse thundered in her ears as she crouched by the window. The dim motel light flickered against the peeling wallpaper. Outside, the world seemed unnaturally still. Not even the crickets dared to sing. The black SUV idled across the street, headlights off. The woman stepping out looked untouched by chaos, immaculate coat, blonde hair pinned with precision, posture calm as if she'd come for afternoon tea instead of revenge. Isabella Reed. Rachel's breath hitched. "That's impossible," she whispered. Reed had been arrested. The news had shown her in cuffs. The footage had gone global. But now she was here. And alive. A door slammed somewhere outside. Another SUV pulled in behind the first, two men stepping out in black tactical gear, scanning the lot. Reed didn't even glance at them. She adjusted her gloves, smoothed her coat, and looked up directly at Rachel's window. Their eyes met through the fogged glass. Rachel froze. That look wasn't anger, it wasn't even threat, it was recognition. As if Reed had known exactly where she'd be. Rachel's fingers tightened around the pistol on the nightstand. "They found us," she whispered. Milo stirred from the floor, ears perked, low growl rumbling deep in his chest. "Stay," she ordered softly. The headlights flared suddenly, flooding the room with white. Rachel ducked away, heart pounding. Every instinct screamed run, but running had already cost her too much. She crawled to her pack, grabbed the hard drive's clone copy, and stuffed it inside her jacket. The air in the room felt electric, charged like before a storm. Then came the knock. 3 slow, deliberate taps on the door. Rachel stayed silent. Another pause, then Reed's voice calm, measured, chillingly polite. "Ms. Morgan, you've been very busy." The sound of that voice sent a shiver through her. Smooth as glass, sharp as a blade. Rachel didn't answer. Reed continued. "You exposed something you barely understood. I thought you'd learned long ago that truth isn't always virtue. Sometimes it's leverage." Rachel's hand hovered over the doorknob, gun ready. Her voice came out low, steady. "You've got a lot of nerve showing up after what you've done." Reed chuckled softly. "Oh, come now. After what you've done, I'd say we're even. You broke into military property, stole classified materials, detonated explosives, and caused the deaths of 6 contractors." Rachel swallowed hard. "They weren't contractors, they were hitmen, yours." "Perspective," Reed replied. "We all have one." Another knock, firmer this time. Rachel stepped back. Her reflection in the mirror caught her eye, tired, bruised, streaks of dirt still smudged along her face. She barely recognized herself. Reed's tone softened, almost persuasive. "You're not a villain, Rachel. You were never built for this kind of war. You were a mechanic, a good one. You fix things. You make them run. But you can't fix the world. You don't understand how fragile the balance is." Rachel clenched her jaw. "Balance? Is that what you call selling weapons to both sides?" Reed didn't answer right away. When she finally did, her voice was colder. "Idealism is dangerous. You learned that overseas, so did Weber." Rachel's stomach twisted. "Don't say his name." Reed sighed almost sympathetically. He was brave but foolish. He thought the truth would save him too. That was enough. Rachel raised the pistol, aimed square at the door, and said quietly, "Walk away." There was silence. Then, surprisingly, Reed obeyed. The sound of her heels faded as she stepped back toward the SUV. Rachel stayed frozen until she heard the engine roar to life. Through the window, She saw Reed standing beside the open door, her face lit faintly by the glow of headlights. She lifted her gaze one last time and said something, barely audible, before climbing inside. Rachel couldn't hear it, but she could read lips. "You're already part of this." The SUVs pulled away, taillights vanishing into the dark. Rachel stood there for a long time, the silence pressing against her ears. She felt cold, but not from the air, from the realization that Reed wasn't bluffing. The arrest, the headlines, the broadcast, all theater. Someone had pulled strings, rewritten reality, bent truth again. The woman she thought she'd brought down was still free, still powerful. And now she wanted Rachel alive. But why? Rachel turned off the light, sitting on the edge of the bed. Milo climbed up beside her, resting his head on her lap. She stroked his fur absently, staring into nothing. Every victory she thought she'd won now felt hollow. The truth was out, yes, but so was she, exposed, alone. And Reed's last words echoed in her mind like a curse. "You're already part of this." Sleep came in restless flashes, faces, flames, Weber's voice whispering through static. "You were the only one I trusted." When she woke, dawn was breaking, pale and cold. The world outside looked ordinary again. The SUVs were gone, the motel parking lot empty. Birds even dared to sing again, unaware of the ghosts that had passed through the night. Rachel packed in silence. No coffee, no goodbye, just movement. She left cash on the bed, whistled for Milo, and slipped out the back door into the woods behind the motel. She didn't know where she was heading, only that staying meant dying. Hours later, as she crossed the ridgeline, her phone buzzed for the first time in days. Unknown number. Rachel hesitated, then answered. "Carter." The voice on the other end wasn't his. "Ms. Morgan, this is Agent Wells, Federal Bureau of Investigation. We need to speak with you regarding the Reed investigation." Rachel froze. "How'd you get this number?" "Your colleague Ben Carter gave it to us before he—" The pause was too long. Rachel's stomach dropped. "Before he what?" "Before he was killed," the agent finished. "Car accident 2 hours after the story broke." Her heart turned to stone. "That's no accident. We're not ruling anything out, but we need your cooperation. You're a key witness now. We can offer protection." Rachel laughed bitterly. "Protection from who? The people you work for." "Ms. Morgan." She hung up before he could finish. Her hand trembled as she pocketed the phone. Milo looked up at her, sensing the shift. She crouched, whispering, "They're cleaning house. Carter's gone." Her voice cracked on the last word. She pressed her forehead to Milo and closed her eyes. "We can't stop now. We finish this no matter what it takes." The next hours were a blur of motion. Rachel followed old trails only she knew, remnants of search routes from her service days. Each step felt heavier, each breath sharper. She didn't have a plan anymore, just survival. By nightfall, she reached the old clearing near the river, the one where she'd once hidden an emergency supply cache long ago. She dug into the dirt, uncovering the metal box, its hinges rusted but intact. Inside, ammo, maps, batteries, and a small burner laptop wrapped in foil. She powered it on. The screen flickered weakly to life. And there, buried in a hidden folder, was another file, one she hadn't seen before, dated months after Weber's death. She opened it. Video feed. Weber alive, sitting in a dim room, face gaunt but eyes steady. "Rachel," he said quietly. Her blood ran cold. "I don't have long. If you're seeing this, you found what I left. They'll come for you too, but listen, Reed isn't alone. She's working with higher clearance, deeper pockets. They own the silence. Promise me you won't let them buy yours." The feed cut out abruptly. Rachel sat there in the glow of the screen, tears burning down her face. He'd known. He'd seen it all coming. She whispered, voice breaking, "I promise." A branch snapped behind her. She turned fast, gun raised. Nothing but trees. Then a whisper, not voice but air, the faint sound of metal under boot. They'd found her again. Rachel shut the laptop, grabbed her pack and ran. The forest erupted behind her, shouts, lights, chaos. Bullets tore through branches as she sprinted through the darkness, Milo keeping pace. Her lungs burned, her vision blurred, but she didn't slow. Ahead, the river gleamed faintly under moonlight. Her only escape. She dove in without hesitation. The water was ice. Shock tore through her chest, but she kept swimming, the current pulling her downstream, away from the lights, away from the world that had turned on her. When she finally crawled onto the opposite bank, gasping, every inch of her body trembled. Milo staggered beside her, dripping and shivering. Rachel collapsed on the muddy shore, staring up at the stars. Weber's voice echoed again in her mind. "Promise me you won't let them buy your silence." She closed her eyes, whispering through chattering teeth, "Not in this lifetime." Somewhere in the darkness, a single gunshot cracked the night. Then silence. End of Part 5, approx. 1,585 words. Would you like me to continue into Part 6, beginning from that chilling aftermath, Rachel wounded, presumed dead, but finding a new, haunting way to fight back from the shadows? Absolutely. Continuing seamlessly, raw, cinematic, and emotionally charged, here's Part 6 of a lone mechanic found a helicopter lost for years. What was inside changed her life forever, around 1550-plus words, beginning right after the gunshot and Rachel's disappearance into the river. Did silence mean safety or death? The forest didn't answer. It never did. Dawn crept over the valley like a wound reopening. Mist hung low over the river, pale light bleeding through the trees. Birds began to stir again, but the sound was distant, hollow, as if afraid to fill the emptiness left behind. On the muddy riverbank, the water shifted. A shape moved beneath the reeds. Then Rachel Morgan's hand broke through, trembling, covered in blood and mud. She dragged herself up slowly, gasping, coughing river water from her lungs. Her body was a map of bruises, her jacket torn by bullets and branches. A shallow graze burned along her ribs, close, but not fatal. She rolled onto her back, chest heaving, staring at the pale morning sky. For a long time she didn't move. She could have died last night. She should have died. But she didn't. Milo limped out of the river a few feet away, shaking water from his fur, whining softly. Rachel forced a weak smile. "Still with me." He padded over, pressing his head against her shoulder. She closed her eyes for a moment, letting his warmth anchor her to something real. The gunshot that had echoed through the woods, it wasn't meant to miss. Someone had fired from the ridge, but something, whether instinct, timing, or luck, had pulled her under just before the bullet reached her. She was alive because the river took her. And whoever pulled that trigger would think she was. That thought alone, the power of being presumed dead, gave her a strange calm. Rachel sat up, wincing. The cold bit deep, every muscle screamed. She peeled off her soaked jacket, inspecting the wound at her side. Shallow, painful, but survivable. She tore a strip from her shirt, tied it tight, and stood slowly. The forest was silent again. "They'll think we're gone," she whispered. Milo tilted his head. Rachel nodded to herself. "Good, let's keep it that way." She looked down the river east, toward the hills that eventually met the interstate. Civilization. But going there now would be suicide. Every camera, every drone, every checkpoint would have her face on it. No, she needed time, space, a place to breathe and think. And she knew exactly where. There was an old ranger station 2 ridges north, decommissioned years ago, left to rot. She'd helped fix its generator once during her first months in the mountains. If anything still worked there, she could set up camp, regroup, plan her next move. Rachel checked her gear, half her ammo gone, laptop cracked, only one magazine left. But the drive was still sealed inside her pack. The copy she'd made, the one she'd carried through hell, was somehow intact. She tightened the straps, took one last look at the river and began to climb. The journey took hours. Her legs felt like lead, her lungs raw from cold air. The path was steep, lined with jagged stone and fallen branches. Several times she stumbled, catching herself on roots and rocks. But she kept going. Every step felt heavier with the weight of everything she'd lost. Her home, her peace, her friend Carter, her sense of safety. And yet beneath that exhaustion, there was something else. Resolve. For the first time since the war, she wasn't following orders. She wasn't reacting. She was choosing. When she finally reached the ranger station, it was barely standing, a skeleton of wood and rusted metal perched on a rocky ridge. The windows were broken, the roof half collapsed, but it was shelter. Rachel pushed the door open carefully. The hinges groaned like something alive. Inside, dust coated everything. A single desk, an old cot, shelves lined with moldy field manuals. But in the corner, the generator. She knelt beside it, running her fingers over the casing, still breathing. A few adjustments, a drop of oil, a prayer, and after a few pulls of the cord, the machine sputtered to life, coughing up light. The faint hum filled the space like a heartbeat. Rachel exhaled. "You've still got it, Morgan." She wiped her hands on her pants and pulled the burner laptop from her pack. The screen flickered weakly. The damaged antenna barely caught a signal, but it was enough to connect to one of her old encrypted networks, a leftover from her service days. No messages, no contacts, just silence. She typed for hours, rebuilding fragments of the files from memory, rewriting Carter's notes, cross-referencing names and numbers from Weber's documents. Each keystroke steadied her hands. Every name she recovered, every transaction she decrypted, it all pointed to one thing: Reed wasn't working alone. She was protected by people in the highest offices, defense, intelligence, even congressional oversight. Rachel leaned back, staring at the screen. "They were never trying to silence Weber," she murmured. "They were trying to erase him." And her. She looked out the cracked window, the horizon stretching wide and gray. Somewhere down there, the same woman who'd walked out of that SUV was sitting behind another desk, calm as ever, rewriting the story of what happened. The world would believe whatever she wanted them to. Unless Rachel found a way to make the truth unkillable. The kind of truth that couldn't be buried by politics or money. She spent the next few days off the grid, hunting, scavenging, thinking. She found food caches left by hikers, purified river water, and reinforced the cabin door with scrap metal. Milo recovered faster than she did, chasing squirrels like nothing had happened. At night, Rachel watched the stars through the roof's broken slats. The cold crept into her bones, but she didn't light fires anymore. Fire meant visibility. Visibility meant death. Still, in those long hours, her mind wandered to Weber. She could still hear his voice in her head. "You don't win wars by killing, Rachel. You win by telling the story first." She hadn't understood it then, but now she did. The truth wasn't about headlines or arrests. It was about people knowing. So she made a decision. If she couldn't survive long enough to see justice, she'd make sure justice outlived her. Rachel opened the laptop again, plugging in the drive. Her fingers moved fast, typing code, encrypting layers upon layers, building something new, a dead man's switch. If she went silent for more than 72 hours, the files would automatically upload to public servers, to journalists, to the very agencies Reed controlled. She would turn Reed's silence into exposure. It took 3 days to finish. 3 sleepless nights, fueled by caffeine pills and sheer will. By the end, her eyes were bloodshot, her hands raw from typing. But when the final upload test completed successfully, Rachel felt something she hadn't felt in months. Peace. It wasn't victory, but it was control. On the fourth morning, she stood outside the ranger station, watching the fog lift over the mountains. Milo sat beside her, tail thumping lazily. The world looked almost normal again, birds, wind, sunlight cutting through mist. But Rachel knew better. Peace was just the quiet between storms. She reached down, scratching Milo's head. "You did good, soldier." He barked softly, nuzzling her hand. Rachel smiled faintly. "Maybe we finally get to rest, huh?" She almost believed it. Until she heard the helicopter. Faint at first, a low hum on the edge of hearing. Then louder, closer. Rachel's stomach dropped. She stepped into the open, scanning the sky. The sun glinted off something metallic. A single chopper, military gray, cutting across the horizon, no markings. She ran back inside, grabbing her rifle and binoculars. Through the lens, she saw it not a search chopper, a gunship. And worse, the insignia. Aegis Tactical Solutions. Rachel's voice trembled. "They're back." The chopper circled once, scanning the ridge. They couldn't have tracked her so fast unless someone had led them here. She rushed to the laptop, checking the signal feed. The satellite link she'd used for her encryption key, someone had pinged it. They baited her. Rachel tore out the antenna, yanked every wire she could, but it was too late. The hum outside grew deafening. The cabin shook as the helicopter hovered directly overhead. She could see the pilot through the window, a woman. Blonde hair, black headset, calm, poised. "Read." Rachel's blood ran cold. A spotlight cut through the window, blinding her. She dove to the floor as gunfire ripped through the walls, splinters flying. Milo barked furiously. Rachel crawled toward the back door, kicking it open, grabbing her pack. The drive was still inside, her last weapon. She sprinted into the trees as bullets tore through the station, the roof collapsing behind her. Fire exploded against the walls, the blast wave throwing her forward into the dirt. She rolled, ears ringing, coughing smoke. The station was gone, just flame and ash. Rachel stumbled to her feet, clutching her ribs, and looked back at the burning wreck. Reed hadn't come to talk this time. She'd come to finish it. Rachel raised her chin, defiant. "You'll have to do better than that," she whispered. Then she turned and vanished into the trees, the flames painting her silhouette against the mist like a ghost. Somewhere above, the helicopter circled once more, then flew away, leaving only smoke curling into the morning sky. Rachel limped through the forest until she found an overhang of stone, collapsed beneath it, and held Milo close. The drive pulsed faintly against her chest like a heartbeat. She stared at the horizon, whispering to herself, "They think they buried the truth." A pause. "Let's show them what grows from graves." How many times can a person lose everything before fear becomes fuel? Rachel didn't remember falling asleep. One moment she was staring at the smoke rising from the valley below, and the next the world was gray again, the color of ash and morning fog. The cold gnawed at her skin. Milo's breathing was steady against her shoulder, his fur damp with dew. She opened her eyes to silence. The kind that feels too perfect, too still, like the pause between thunder and lightning. The ranger station was gone, her safe house, her last refuge, nothing but black smoke curling up into a bruised sky. She watched it burn for a long time. That smell, charred wood, fuel, earth, it was the same smell from years ago when the hangar went up in flames in Kandahar. Everything she built, gone again. Rachel clenched her jaw. They really don't learn, do they? She pushed herself up, pain stabbing through her side where the bullet had grazed her days earlier. Her movements were stiff, deliberate. Every breath reminded her that she was still alive, and that being alive meant unfinished business. Milo stood and shook the dirt from his coat. His eyes met hers. She smiled faintly. "You ready, soldier?" He wagged his tail once, quiet and certain. Rachel opened her pack. Inside the drive, her sidearm, one spare magazine, a small transmitter, and Weber's notebook, its pages worn soft from her constant handling. The last page was still folded over, the one with Weber's handwriting. "They only win if we stop telling the story." She traced the letters with her finger. "Guess it's time to start shouting." The helicopter hadn't returned, which meant one of two things: either Reed thought she was dead, or Reed was saving the final strike for something cleaner, quieter. The woman didn't strike Rachel as impulsive. She was surgical, which meant she'd have eyes everywhere. Rachel had to move carefully now, not as prey but as a ghost. She packed up, hid the remnants of her camp under branches, and began trekking north. The path wound through ravines slick with moss, up steep ridges where fog clung like old memories. Each step felt heavier than the last, but she refused to stop. By midday, she reached an overlook that gave her a view of the valley beyond. Far in the distance, she could see the faint shimmer of metal, a communications array, old but still functional. The structure rose out of the trees like the skeleton of something ancient. Its rusted satellite dishes pointed skyward. A government relay station. Decommissioned, according to the maps. But Rachel had been in this game long enough to know decommissioned was just another word for forgotten by everyone except the people who still need it. If she could reach it, she could tap into its uplink, not to send data but to mirror Reed's own communications, to turn their eyes back on themselves. She looked at Milo. "That's our move." The hike took hours. Rain came and went in brief, cold bursts. Her boots sank into mud, her jacket clung heavy to her back. But she didn't complain. Every ache, every bruise, every ounce of fatigue, it reminded her that she was still standing. By the time the tower loomed above her, the light was fading. The structure was taller than she expected, its frame bent and groaning in the wind. Old equipment lay scattered around the base, broken monitors, cables, the skeletal remains of a generator. Rachel walked the perimeter, scanning for motion sensors. None, just decay. Perfect. Inside the control cabin, dust blanketed everything. The panels were dark, the air stale, but the old satellite uplink system still looked intact. She brushed off the controls, opened the access hatch, and connected her burner laptop. The machine whirred weakly, lights blinking like dying fireflies. "Come on," she muttered, "one more miracle." Lines of code filled the screen. Old firmware. Manual override protocols. She bypassed the main terminal, rerouted the power, and reactivated the uplink feed. Then she saw it, faint signals still pinging through the relay. Someone was using this network. She cracked into the active feed, running a mirror sequence. It took minutes, tense, endless minutes before data began to stream. Coordinates, call logs, voice recordings. One line of text made her heart stop. "ETS, read secure channel." Rachel whispered, "Got you." She accessed the most recent call. Audio flickered to life through the speakers, Reed's voice, calm and clipped. "Cleanup phase complete. Morgan presumed KIA. Satellite scan confirms debris consistent with secondary target destruction." A male voice replied, "And if she's not?" Reed paused. "Then she'll come to me, they always do." Rachel's fists tightened. "She's waiting," she murmured, "waiting for me to crawl back." She stared at the flickering console. She could end it right now. Use the uplink to broadcast Reed's own transmission to every agency, every outlet, every ally. But that would be too easy, and Reed would bury it again before it even hit the light. No, this time the truth had to come from her. Rachel thought of Weber, how he died trying to tell a story no one wanted to hear, how silence had killed him faster than bullets. She wasn't going to whisper into the void. She was going to make the world listen. Rachel dug into her pack, pulling out her last remaining satellite beacon, a small cylindrical device she'd salvaged from a downed drone months before. She connected it to the laptop and began uploading. but not to news servers or agencies. To public channels, civilian frequencies, emergency networks, amateur radio bands. If Reed wanted silence, Rachel would flood the airwaves with noise. As the files uploaded, the laptop screen filled with warnings: unauthorized transmission, signal breach detected, system lockdown imminent. Rachel didn't care. She kept typing. Milo whined, ears flat. "I know," she whispered. "They'll trace it, that's the point." The storm broke outside, thunder rolling through the mountains. Rain hammered the roof, leaking through cracks in the ceiling. Sparks flickered from the control panel. The uplink bar hit 60%, then 80%, then 92%. A new message appeared on the screen: direct line incoming. Rachel froze. "Read." She hesitated only a second before accepting. The screen filled with static, then cleared. Reed's face appeared, calm, composed, illuminated by the blue light of her own monitor. "Rachel," she said softly, "you really are predictable." Rachel didn't blink. "You should have stayed buried." Reed smiled faintly. "And you should have stayed retired. Look at you, hiding in ruins, clinging to a past you never understood." "You kill people for profit," Rachel snapped. "That's not a misunderstanding." Reed tilted her head. "No, I manage chaos. You think truth changes the world. It doesn't. Control does. I've built something stable from instability. And you're trying to tear it down for a ghost." Rachel's jaw tightened. That ghost had a name: Thomas Weber. For the first time, Reed's expression faltered just a flicker. He was a good man, but he chose the wrong side. Rachel's eyes narrowed. "No, he chose humanity over profit. You killed him for it." Reed sighed. "And now you're doing the same, dying for a story no one will remember." Rachel glanced at the screen. 99%. She smiled faintly. "Maybe, but at least someone will hear it before I go." Reed's gaze shifted. "What did you do?" "Something you can't undo." The uplink hit 100%. The system beeped, confirming broadcast. The files, the videos, the call logs, everything streamed out across public channels, flooding frequencies like wildfire. Reed's calm cracked. "You think this will save you?" Rachel's voice was quiet, steady. "It's not about saving me." Thunder shook the tower. Sparks rained from the console. The connection flickered. Reed's final words came through distorted. "Then you die with him." The screen went black. Rachel yanked the cable free, grabbed her pack, and ran for the exit. Outside, the rain poured in sheets, wind howling through the tower's metal frame. The first missile hit seconds later. The explosion ripped through the base of the structure, sending debris flying. Rachel dove behind a concrete barrier as fire roared skyward. The tower began to tilt, metal shrieking. "Milo, move," she shouted. The dog sprinted ahead through mud and smoke. The tower collapsed in a thunderous crash, flames devouring what was left. Rachel looked back once, the fire reflecting in her eyes, then turned and ran into the storm. Her body was bruised, bleeding, soaked, but unbroken. Behind her, the last remnants of Reed's empire began to unravel, one frequency, one broadcast, one undeniable truth at a time. Rachel stumbled to a clearing, collapsed to her knees, and watched lightning streak across the horizon. Rain washed blood from her hands. She lifted her face to the sky and whispered, "It's done, Tom." Milo pressed against her side, tail wagging weakly. Rachel smiled, tears lost to the rain. "We did it." For a long moment she just breathed in, out, slow, steady. The storm began to fade. The world around her smelled clean again. She was still alive. But somewhere deep inside, she knew this wasn't the end. Because truth doesn't end with exposure. It begins there. And somewhere out there, Reed was still breathing too. What does freedom feel like after you've burned every bridge to reach it? For Rachel Morgan, it felt like rain. cold, relentless, and honest. She sat beneath the overhang of a collapsed stone bridge, the world around her washed clean by the storm she'd just unleashed. Smoke rose faintly from the valley where the relay tower once stood, a twisted silhouette swallowed by mist. Each breath she took hurt, but not from fear anymore. It was exhaustion, the kind that comes when you finally stop running. Milo lay beside her, soaked and shivering, head resting on her knee. She scratched his ear absently, staring at the horizon. She didn't know how many days had passed. Maybe one, maybe three. The forest blurred into an endless rhythm of wind, water, and silence. But silence, for once, didn't feel like an enemy. The truth was out now. Reed's voice, her deals, her crimes, all of it broadcast to public channels before the tower fell. There was no pulling that back. The signal had gone viral, copied, mirrored, translated, and re-uploaded across platforms she'd never even heard of. And yet there was no celebration, no relief. Just quiet. Rachel tilted her head back, feeling raindrops slide down her face. "We made it," she whispered. "You hear that, Tom? We actually made it." Milo whined softly, pressing closer. She smiled, though her eyes were tired. "I know, he'd call me an idiot for coming this far." The memory of Weber's grin flickered in her mind, that same reckless humor he always carried, even in the darkest moments. He'd believed in people like her, the quiet ones who fixed what others broke, the ones who didn't need medals, just meaning. And maybe that's all this had ever been. Not revenge, not redemption. Just meaning. She sat there until the clouds began to thin, until the gray softened into pale light. The storm passed, leaving the forest dripping and alive again. Birds started to sing. A single beam of sunlight broke through the clouds, glinting off something half buried in the mud beside her. Rachel frowned, reaching for it. A metal tag, dog tag. She rubbed away the dirt. The letters were faint, but she recognized them instantly. CAPT, Thomas Weber. Her breath caught. "How?" she whispered. She looked around, no one. Just forest, river, mist. But somehow the tag had found its way to her. Whether it had washed down from the wreckage above or fallen from her own pack, she didn't know. But it was here. She closed her hand around it, holding it against her chest. "Guess you're still watching, huh?" Milo barked once, sharp and clear like agreement. Rachel laughed softly, shaking her head. "You always did show up late." She stood slowly, her legs stiff, and looked down the ridge. In the distance, faint trails of smoke rose from small fires, the kind that came from crashed drones and burning equipment. Somewhere beyond those ridges, the world was catching up to what she'd done. The broadcasts had gone global. She didn't need to see it to know. Somewhere, anchors were reading headlines. Governments were scrambling. Agents were spinning stories. But it didn't matter. The truth was out of anyone's control now. Rachel began walking, each step deliberate, heavy but steady. The river beside her whispered against the rocks. The sound was peaceful, steady, rhythmic, alive. For the first time since the helicopter wreck, she allowed herself to breathe without looking over her shoulder. Miles later, she found the edge of the forest, a quiet clearing overlooking the mountain road that led toward civilization. A single wooden sign stood half-broken at the roadside. "Welcome to Carter's Hollow." Her chest tightened at the name. Ben Carter. She walked toward it, running her hand over the faded letters. "You'd hate what I've done with your story," she murmured. "But it's out there, Ben. You did it. We did it." She crouched beside the signpost, pulled a small tin box from her pack and opened it. Inside, a flash drive. A single copy of everything. Her last copy. She buried it beneath the roots of the old signpost, packing the earth firmly. "This one stays hidden," she said quietly, "just in case they ever try again." When she stood, she felt lighter. Not safe, never that, but unburdened. As the day stretched into gold, she followed the winding road until the forest gave way to rolling hills. In the distance, she saw smoke from chimneys, the faint outline of a small town. Not her town, but a town, people, life. And for a fleeting second she wondered if she could just walk there, start over, be no one. Then she saw the newspaper stand by the roadside. The headline made her stop. Global scandal. Aegis tactical executives face arrests, whistleblower still missing. Her photo was beneath it, grainy, from an old Air Force ID. Rachel Morgan, former mechanic, suspected source of leaked files. She stared at it for a long moment. Her lips curved into a faint smile. Missing, fine, she said softly. Missing means free. Milo barked quietly, tail wagging. Yeah, she whispered, turning away from the road. Let's go home. But home wasn't a cabin or a place anymore. It was something she carried, quiet, steady, and unshakable. She and Milo followed the riverbank north until they reached the burned foundation of what used to be her cabin. Blackened beams, shattered glass, ash mixed with new growth, tiny green shoots pushing through the ruins. Rachel knelt and brushed her fingers over the earth. You still remember, she said softly. The wind stirred through the trees, gentle now. She unpacked her bag for the last time. Inside, Weber's notebook, her old wrench, a folded patch from her uniform, and the dog tag she'd found by the river. She placed them all together in a small tin box, set it in the earth, and covered it with stones. There, she whispered, you can rest now, Tom. She sat there for a long while, the sun dipping low behind the ridges. Milo lay beside her, eyes half closed, peaceful. For the first time in what felt like years, the silence didn't ache. It comforted. Rachel watched the horizon, the colors shifting from gold to deep crimson. She thought about the years she'd spent fixing engines, patching up machines that had been pushed beyond their limits. The way she'd always believed that anything broken could be repaired if you just took the time to understand it. But people weren't machines. The world wasn't either. And sometimes, fixing it meant breaking it first. She took one last look at the horizon, whispered, you were right, Weber. It's not about who tells the story first. She paused. It's about who refuses to stop telling it. As the last light faded, she stood, slung her pack over her shoulder and began walking north into the open, endless stretch of the Blue Ridge Mountains. Her silhouette merged with the mist, her step slow but sure. The wind carried her whisper through the trees, soft and steady. Sometimes dignity doesn't speak, it simply acts. The forest answered with silence, not empty this time but alive. And for those who ever came searching, for those who ever doubted, her story remained scattered across radio waves, etched in the memories of those who heard her voice. A lone mechanic who found a helicopter lost for years and uncovered a truth that could never be buried again. Rachel Morgan was gone, but her echo lingered, quiet, defiant, eternal.